Building the force. So a little bit of a change in the schedule. But my name is Stephen Gomez from Northrop Grumman, and I have the honor and pleasure to introduce our panel this morning. So we have Mr. Scott Smith from Cyber and EW, and Mr. Sean Beauvais, pardon me, I'm sorry. Okay, and then Colonel Folk from Signal. So let's give them a warm welcome. Gentlemen.
Okay, good morning. I'm Scott Smith. I'm Director of Training for the Cyber School. So as we look at building the force, we have kind of three different parts to this. So Sean and I are both from the Cyber School, so we're going to talk about what the Cyber School is doing to integrate CEMA at the tactical levels for unified land operations. And then Colonel Folk from Signal School is also going to talk kind of what the Signal School is doing. So I'm kind of doing the training aspect of it, but before we really kind of look at the training piece, just a little bit of background, like why are we talking about integrating CEMA at tactical levels? So if you go back to the origins of the Cyber Mission Force, really it was kind of built for strategic forces. And then when Chief of Staff of the Army kind of looked and said, oh, hey, that's great what you're doing for the COCOMs and above, but what are you really doing for the Army? So that was kind of how this idea of CEMA support to Corps and below developed. And then when they really kind of looked at the force and they said, okay, well, we're kind of restricted with the number of folks that are in the Cyber Mission Force. Who is going to be the folks who integrate this at the tactical level? They really kind of came across the EW. So the EW team is the ones who we're looking at as really the integrators and synchronizers for bringing CEMA support down to that tactical level. So why are we doing this? Again, I mean, this isn't any news for anyone who's been sitting through any discussions so far, but American forces no longer have the same freedom of maneuver that they had through the past probably 20 years. When you look at the threats that are out there now, especially with the Chinese and the Russians, they have very well-developed capabilities, and they've displayed them in some different theaters already. So again, why we're doing this is we have to be competitive. We have to keep up with the Joneses here. Okay, and then as you look at it, as we integrate cyber and electronic warfare at those tactical levels, a lot of the commanders don't really care how we're doing that. So one of the things we really have to work with our students is communicating, what they're doing as cyber operators or as cyber planners to the mission commanders. Commandant of the Marine Corps said, as a commander, I'm not really interested in the ones and zeros. So we just had General Townsend come through. He did a visit to the Cyber School last week. Again, General Townsend doesn't have a real strong cyber background, so it was being able to communicate, as we had our captains talking with the TRADOC commander, so getting them to communicate exactly what they're doing behind their keyboard in a way that's understandable for maneuver commanders can be a challenge sometimes. You have people who like to talk techno-geek, and you have folks who just don't understand, either, for various reasons. So, as a commander, they don't really care what we're doing, but they just want those effects. So I'm going to talk about how we're training to get to achieve those effects on the battlefield. Okay, if you look, this is from the old FM 3-38 when they talked about what CEMA is. It's been the intersection of cyber, electronic warfare, and spectrum management operations. So going back, I know we're updating doctrine. I know a lot of the cyber doctrine is probably already outdated, even though it was just published, 2 or 3 years ago. So this is what's in FM 338 right now. And then as you look, it starts to integrate what they're actually doing out at the training centers. Is they're starting to integrate additional enablers, bringing space, bringing information operations, bringing intel, all coming into really kind of what CEMA is becoming. So no longer is it just really kind of looking at the cyber EW SMO pyramid, but it's really kind of looking at integrating additional enablers. So how do we help our students, figure out how to do CEMA at tactical levels? Okay, coming out of ADRP 3.0, so as you look, you have these CEMA cells. So just like most other types of operations, you want reps from all the different staff sections. So again, as we talk with our students, looking at their role within the brigade combat, and then also at higher levels. So if you sat through the last talk where General Morrison was leading, you talked about synchronizing things. So it's integrate, synchronize, plan, coordinate. All those things they're going to be the responsibility of the CEMA sections here at the tactical level. So the CEMA cells are going to be the ones who are going to be responsible for integrating CEMA in those tactical organizations. So not only do they have to be experts at cyber and EW, they also have to know, the other things that go into CEMA. So they've got to understand spectrum management. They're going to have to understand information operations. Space is going to have a piece of that. Integrating intel, keeping intel fresh throughout the whole process. So again, how do we get at that within the cyber school? Okay, so at the cyber school, we kind of have two different intended audiences. We have the folks who are going through either initial entry or professional military education, so actually the cyber, folks who are actually coded cyber. So as they come through for AIT, BOLIC, Captain's Career Course, WOBIC, WOAC, ALC, SLC. So those folks, if you look at the start at the top, those are the folks who are either operators or planners. So when we talk about, there's four kind of broad roles when you look at cyber. You have your planners, your operators, your analysts, and your tool developers. Really what we're looking at with the operators is we're teaching them the technical skills. So those are the folks who are getting hands-on behind the keyboard. It's really not the leaders. So that's it's always a shock for the lieutenants when they come in, is because they all think they're coming in to spend hours and hours upon the keyboard. Some of them will, if they become tool developers, but for the most part, those folks are the leaders of the teams. So for them, really kind of the focus is on the planners piece of it. So we have, for the operators, we baseline them. Everyone gets Cybercomm and Technical Core, 9-week. It is the standard across the Cyber Mission Force, so across Cybercomm, CCTC, Cybercomm and Technical Core is the foundational technical, and then we also provide additional technical courses depending on the particular population that's going through the class. To baseline them for planning, we give them Cyber Operations Planners course, so that's a 2-week course, really focused at it's MDMP, it's the joint planning process, but it's applied to the cyber problem. So that one's taught at the top secret SCI level because we're using real-world operations, and we're giving them the operation, they're developing the plan for it. So again, I guess TRADOC probably wouldn't be happy because the date scenario might not apply so much on that one, because they're actually using actual official current orders that we're going through. So it's very relevant, it's very applicable, it's very current, and the products they develop are then integrated, turned back over to the force so they can integrate them into existing plans. But the second group we also have to address at the cyber school is the folks who aren't cyber. So what do we do to support the force out there? So there are familiarization. So we're charged with developing familiarization training for the entire Army. So just like folks are going through, your annual information assurance, your annual cyber challenge type of training, we're developing the same thing to expose folks across the force to cyber. Army Cyber Operations Training Strategy, ACOTS, so this is kind of that 1,000 level training, like Cyber 101. We also teach integration for maneuver forces. So Army Leader Cyber Operations course, ALCOC, that's a course that's targeted to maneuver staffs. So folks, as they get ready to go to their combat training center rotation or get ready for a deployment, we send out MTTs, mobile training teams, to go work with their staffs to focus and help their staffs learn how to integrate and synchronize CEMA at those tactical levels. So we're sending out, our trainers, the folks who are working with COPSI, who are working with the EW folks, we're sending them out to the tactical formations to help them get ready so they can understand how to employ CEMA at tactical formations. And then kind of that middle piece, because we're working from the top down and the bottom up, is this synchronization. So it all centers around that senior leader. So we recognize that senior leaders maybe don't have the week or 2 weeks to spend in the ALCOC or the COPSI training. So the SLCOO, the Senior Leaders Cyberspace Operations Orientation, so that's a 2-day, 8-hour block, so 4 hours one day, 4 hours the second day. So that's where we're working with those senior leaders to help them understand what they should be asking of their staffs. What guidance do they need to provide to their staffs so they can effectively integrate to start working the CEMA problems, and then what questions should they be asking of their staffs? What should they be looking for as products? So that's kind of how we're working with the two different populations that we really work, go through our training. So we have the 17 kind of coming from the top down, and then we have the non-17 folks working from the bottom up. What we've also, and this kind of lays out, so I've talked about Cyber Operations Planners course, again, TSSCI. ALCOC I talked about, that's the 1 week collective training with the maneuver forces. And then the bottom here, so initially I talked about how the EW forces are going to be the forces that we're looking at to integrate CEMA into the tactical formations. So what have we been doing with them to help get them spun up to be these CEMA integrators? For the NCOs and the officers, we have a 3-week EW Transition to Cyber course, EWTC. That one's taught at the TSSCI level. We're going out, again, as mobile training teams, MTTs. We're hitting the different installations, and we're specifically targeting the senior EW NCOs and the EW officers to get them in, so they can start thinking about how they have to interact with the staff on the planning function of looking at planning, integrating, synchronizing CEMA activities at the tactical level. So it's a course that's similar to the Cyber Operations Planners course, but this is really directed at the tactical level. So COPSI is kind of a strategic planning, EWTC is a tactical level planners course. So this is introducing the folks so they understand what they need to do as the CEMA integrators at the tactical level. It's also talking to them about so they start to understand the people they need to be talking to outside of their organization to ensure these CEMA operations are fully integrated. Okay, so that's kind of what we're doing from a training standpoint, and I'm going to now pass it over to Sean Beauvais. He'll talk about what we're doing from a manning standpoint.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it. Sean Beauvais, I'm the Director for the Office Chief of Cyber. This is a problem set we've been looking at since I've been here at the Cyber School since 2015. There are some huge changes coming with the electronic warfare workforce. And those of you, I see some familiar faces out there that have been out at these the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we briefed a concept of how we were going to, from a strategic messaging standpoint, fully integrate electronic warfare into cyber. That'll actually go into effect 1 October of 2018, here in just a few weeks. So there's some big changes coming with that I'll walk you through. So this chart up here, just so I can orient you real quick, just the 3 cohorts, officers across the top, warrant officers through the middle, and then the enlisted force on the bottom. I want to hit a couple of the big changes for all those. Probably the biggest change is with the officer cohort. So today, functional area 29 is a captain to colonel functional area. We're going to shift that to a area of concentration under the cyber branch, 17 Bravo. Today, the functional area is recruited from throughout the entire Army. So infantry, combat arms, those officers out there at the captain level put into transfer over to functional area 29. In the future, the 17 Bravo will only be assessed out of 17 Alpha. Every electronic warfare officer will be qualified as a cyber operations officer before they become an electronic warfare officer. That does not mean we're going to stop V-tipping in. That does not mean a captain still can't come in and be an EW officer. Just in the new model, that captain would come in, go through the transition training, captain's career course if they hadn't got it in their previous branch, and then they'd be deemed a 17 Alpha, and then they'd go on to further training if they went the electronic warfare path. So we're going to be training the 17 Bravos at 2 stages. We are going to handpick some BOLIC students and send them to the electronic warfare qualification immediately following the 17 Alpha BOLIC, because as we go forward and we start building out platoons that I'll talk about on the next slide, they're going to have lieutenant platoon leaders. So we're going to have the lieutenants on the electronic workforce as well, electronic warfare workforce as well. But I'll talk about that in just a second. So then the warrant officers, for both the warrant officers and enlisted, we'll still have the technical fields. We'll have the cyber technical folks and the electronic warfare technical folks. We'll look at possibly merging them at senior ranks down the road, but it will be two separate and distinct. So on 1 October, 290 Alpha shifts over to 170 Bravo. And the big changes with the warrant officers is going to be a much more robust training pipeline. So today, the electronic warfare workforce, not that they're poorly trained or not trained to standard, because they absolutely are, but we are definitely expanding their capabilities. So in the future, you're going to have electronic warfare professionals out in formations that have a better understanding of wave propagation, RF theory. They're going to get additional math put into their curriculums. It's going to be a much more capable force than it is today. And when I get down to the enlisted, I'll talk some specifics about the training increases there. So we will continue to assess the warrant officers from the electronic warfare NCOs, but similar to what we do on the cyber side, that'll also be open up to the entire Army. So if there's NCOs out there in other branches that have a propensity for electronic warfare or have that capability, they'll be able to apply for 290 Alpha, soon to be 170 Bravo as well. Transition from the 29 Echo over to 17 Echo. Here's probably the biggest change there is we're going to take a in-service accession MOS. That means we bring them in at sergeant and move them on up from there. We're going to take that in-service accession MOS and we're going to change that to what the Army calls a new accessions MOS. We're going to recruit them off the street. The action to do that is being drafted right now. It's sitting on my desk. We'll hope to have it to General Hersey for signature by the end of this week. But by taking that from an E5 to E9 MOS and bringing that down to E3 and bringing them off the street, what that does for us, when you get to senior sergeant and staff sergeant, you'll have electronic warfare NCOs that have 6 to 8 years dedicated electronic warfare experience instead of today where you're sending a sergeant or staff sergeant straight through a course and they're wearing rank that's equivalent to 20 or 30 level, but the EW skill set in their bucket is a 10 level skill set. So down the road, we think that'll definitely put more capable NCOs into the formations and give us a better qualified pool of NCOs to recruit our warrant officers from as well. Another big change on this, the current training pipeline for the 17 Echo, 9 weeks, Scott, is a 9-week curriculum. So we've been working with the EW trainers out at Fort Sill, which that training will eventually move here to Fort Gordon, Georgia. We've been working with them, the training director at Mr. Smith and his folks, probably the last 12, 18 months. And they're looking at taking that curriculum from the 9 weeks today and expanding that out to 34 to 36 weeks, depending on where it shakes out. And like I was mentioning earlier, that's to start putting a much more capable, a much larger capability into FORCECOM formations to give the warfighter better tools to employ on the cyber, CEMA. I throw out the CEMA and include the cyber piece with the electronic warfare workforce as well. All right, this slide here, this is a slide I stole from our TICM EW folks. We've had many versions of this over the last 2.5, 3 years as we've built this out. But to orientate you to it, going across the rows, these are by echelon, AFCEA, Corps, Division, BCT. But what I'm going to talk to you about this is I'm going to talk to you about it from the column perspective. So starting with this first column here, the little yellow boxes with the CEMA sections. One of the, as we sat down 2.5, 3 years ago and started talking through this, the CEMA sections at echelon were not robust enough to do the planning, synchronization, and integration we needed for cyber, electronic warfare, and other capabilities. So we dropped the force design update from the Cyber Center of Excellence folks in the CDID, the Capabilities Development Integration Directorate. We dropped the force design update to repurpose some of the EW forces that were out there and plus up these CEMA sections to give a more robust capability. For example, the division was a 6 or 7 man cell. Going forward, that will be a 10-person EW cell, one of that 10-person being a 25 Echo from the signal side, Spectrum Management NCO. So putting a more robust planning capability in, and then we started looking at this middle column here with actually putting out, no kidding, a unit of actions for electronic warfare. Because when electronic warfare was stood up, when the need was spelled out in 2006 and they started to build it out, and they really started to build it out strong in the 2009 time frame, it was for the counter IED mission. So they put a bunch of singleton electronic warfare personnel down into maneuver battalions, down into maneuver companies, and we never had a unit of action where they were consolidated with the same skill set, like-minded people, being able to do training and whatnot. So we started, in this column here, we started looking at how do we get from singletons out there in FORCECOM formations, where do we need to consolidate them? So as the first step we took was, I don't know if you all heard the first panel this morning when they were talking about General Barrier and General Morrison coming together and saying, hey, we need, within our MICO formation, we need to put some EW platoon in there. We need to bring the same skill sets. And in particular, in that discussion, they were talking about, hey, you're building out 2 separate systems that are going to have very similar capability. So why don't we partner and do one system for SIGINT and EW? Well, from the personnel side of that, one of the first moves we made in that force design update, we're going to add a platoon to the MICO. We had some conversations about changing the name of the company, Military Intelligence Company, to MIEW Company. I think it settled on it's going to stay a MICO, but there will be an electronic warfare platoon in there. That electronic warfare platoon, 14 personnel. You'll have the platoon leader I mentioned earlier, the 17 Bravo lieutenant, a sergeant first class, and then you'll have 12 team members. So you'll have 3 4-man teams manning electronic warfare vehicles. So those are coming. The latest Army structure addendum authorized growth to start building those out to the tune of about 288. If you divide that by 14, that's about 20 and a half platoons. So it won't quite shake out that way, but in FY19, there'll be a growth of 288 to start manning those platoons. So the efforts that Scott was talking about on the training side, a lot of that is being expedited so we can start filling those sooner rather than later. That EW platoon sitting in the MICO is on the Cyber Center of Excellence's Special Reporting Code 71. So that means that the military intelligence folks or the maneuver center folks can't reach in there and say, hey, we want to convert that 17 Echo to an oboe player or whatever they want that day. So that any changes to that formation would have to come through the CDID section here. So as we got that going, the discussion elevated up to the corps level, and they said, hey, we need to start adding companies there. So in the last 3 or 4 months, we started holding weekly meetings, and we're in the process of developing electronic warfare companies to embed in the EMIBs. I think the expeditionary MI brigades, if anybody's not tracking that, so it'd be there's 3 EMIBs on active duty, 1 for each corps. Each of them have 2 battalions. Each of the battalion would have an EW company. I think right now we're looking at about a 58-person strong company or detachment for each of those, but that's going to be some additional growth for the electronic warfare workforce as well. So and that's going on. So the force design updates for that, we're expediting that. We're trying to catch it up with the EW platoon one. Obviously, we're not going to build this out in FY19, but for part of the total Army analysis, we hope to start building this out in the FY21 timeframe. Well, we were having these discussions here. The Army from the Chief of Staff of the Army level, decided to add do a pilot for the multi-domain task force. And within the multi-domain task force, I know a lot of the briefs this week have focused on how the Army's shifting to multi-domain. TRADOC Commander General Thompson, when he was fighting the Syria mission, really started to refine that concept. So that's starting to be built out. So they're going to do a pilot. So our part of that pilot, the IQs here, that's the intelligence, cyber, electronic warfare, and then you got one S that stands for both space and signal. But that's the IQs is the domain support for those domains under that multi-domain task force. Right now, the cyber and electronic warfare bill for that is about 55 personnel. It's one MDTF that they're doing the pilot for. Depending on how that shapes out, we've heard there could be upwards of 5 MDTFs built out. So we're not sure how that's going to track. The actual pilot for the MDTF, they will go IOC in April of 2020. So we got a little bit of room down there. We're going to go IOC, the initial operation capability on the IQs, January of this upcoming year. So we'll hope to run, start an IOC and run through several exercises so that we have a pretty idea of how we're going to support that multi-domain task force when they stand up their IOC, basically 15 months or 14 months later or whatever that comes out to. Now, while all this was going on, building out these elements by echelon, our cyber piece was working the Cyberspace Warfare Support Battalion. Some of you might have heard it before as Cyber Support to Corps and Below, but it's the same concept. They just shift to the Cyberspace Warfare Support Battalion. Now, what the Cyberspace Warfare Support Battalion brings is expeditionary cyber teams to downward reinforce from our cyber out into FORCECOM formations. So within the CWSB, when they get it totally built out in 2025, there's going to be 12 of these ECTs, expeditionary cyber teams. So at any given time, their plan is to be able to support up to 12 brigade combat team formations. Obviously, that would be a surge operation. They would not be able to sustain support to 12 BCTs at any given time, but that's their goal, is to be able to surge for a short period of time to support 12 BCTs. This Cyberspace Warfare Support Battalion, that's where bringing offensive cyberspace effects onto the battlefield comes into play. Any offensive piece would be coordinated from here, but the CWSB would actually bring in the delivery or oversee the coordination for reach back for offensive capability. So those are the big changes coming on the electronic warfare, and then dabbling into the cyber side. Go ahead.
How does that battalion compare to the Cyber Protection Brigade, their battalions and their ECTs?
So I've not heard of the the question is, how does the Cyberspace Warfare Support Battalion compare to the Cyber Protection Brigade battalions and their ECTs? Now, in the Cyber Protection Brigade, they have the cyber protection teams, and elements of those have deployed forward, but I've not heard of them referred to as expeditionary cyber teams being deployed forward. But those cyber protection teams, as they've deployed forward, whether it's Europe or other places, they've deployed to reinforce defensive capabilities. So to answer your question, I think the main difference would be this would bring in full spectrum cyberspace operations. The past deployments by CPT, cyber protection teams within Cyber Protection Brigade, have been focused on the defensive side. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. At this point, that's the last slide for the cyber school. I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Falk, and then we'll have a question and answer session when he's done.
See if I can do this. So my name's Colonel Matt Falk. I'm the Director of OCOS. We do signal proponency for the Signal Corps, and when we were asked to speak at this, build the force, it was kind of like, well, the Signal Corps is already built, so what are we going to talk about? So what we decided to talk about was really just give an update to the Signal Corps. I've got 2 slides on the officer side and 2 slides on the enlisted side, a couple of things that have materialized over the last couple of years. I just got in the job about 30 days ago, so I have a whole host of plants in the audience that can answer questions that I can't answer. But the first real update is the 25 Golfs. That MOS is going away. That was signed, I think, a couple of years ago. Basically, it made S6 positions 25 Golfs. XOS3 positions were going to be 25 Alphas, and then we would go, once you made Colonel, you would become a 25 Zulu. So basically the Signal School, or the Office of Chief Signal, felt that we thought we were maybe solving the wrong problem, and so we've reversed that decision. But the Golfs were intended to provide a more technical S6 type of person. So there was a 19-week course that was going to be added on to the SCCC, and then you'd get your Golf identifier, essentially. That takes effect 1 October 2020, so FY21. Those Golf positions that are in divisions, brigade combat teams, and battalions will go away. And just another small thing is that we've now, all Signal lieutenants, as they come through SBOLIC, will apply for their TS clearance. So eventually all Signal officers will have their TS clearance, which in today's environment has been very important. So I'm going to go back. So the problem that we thought we had, the Golf wasn't going to solve it, so we kind of retooled it and said, okay, what do we need to do? And really it was focused around the S6s and the troubles that they have down at the battalion, brigade, and division level. And so one of the initiatives is we are adding an elective, but it's kind of mandatory for Signal officers, that basically the Signal support to decisive action. So it's basically almost like a brigade S6 course that will be taught at ILE. The majors that go through ILE, Signal majors identified to go be S6s, which is about 75% of the population in ILE, they will have to take this brigade S6 course as an elective in ILE. For the Signal captains, we are currently trying to align the battalion S6 course so that it is right after SCCC. So if you're identified by HRC to go be a battalion S6, you'll just be enrolled into that course, and you'll spend an additional couple of weeks at Fort Gordon going through that course. Okay, so that's really kind of it for the officers. The one point I want to hit, though, is the new chief of Signal, General Eubank. He's trying to flip things around a little bit. We always kind of consider ourselves communicators first. Well, what we're seeing, I'm a former G6, and what I saw was S6s are not getting fired because they're not technically competent. They're getting fired because they can't lead. And so he's trying to instill this new ethos of leader, team player, communicator. So you leader first, team player. You know, if the S4 is having trouble doing something, the S6 isn't just sitting around and looking at routers and switches. He's helping the team, and then communicator. So that's kind of the mantra that we're trying to push forward. So that is the officer side. On the enlisted side, this group right here, this is the last time you'll ever see this slide. So we're revamping this slide because it's kind of difficult to read. But basically, MOS convergence. So there's 17 MOSs in Signal Corps, which is way too many. We've become too specialized. We need to become more multidisciplined. So the Office of Chief of Signals come up with a phased approach of converging MOSs, and the first phase has already been submitted. So we looked at the functions of these MOSs and where they overlapped. And so for the first phase, so 25 Sierra, 25 Papa will merge and become 25 Sierra. That will also eliminate the 25 Tango once you make E8 in that function. So that eliminates 2 MOSs. 25 Charlie, 25 Uniform, essentially radio operators. That was a pretty easy one to do. 25 Charlies will become 25 Uniforms. And then the 25 Mike in the 25 Victor, in visual information, 25 Mike will be deleted and it'll be rolled up into the 25 Victor. So there's your 4. We go from 17 to 13. That's already been submitted. FY22, that will take effect. Second phase is kind of up for debate right now. So you see the 3 gold MOSs here on the inside. Those are the ones that we're kind of targeting right now. So we're in the process of kind of briefing this to the signal leaders right now. But the initial phase 2 was going to go from 13 MOSs to 10. We think it's probably going to go lower than that. It just may take a little bit more time. So as you can see with the FY22, that was submitted this year, so it takes place in 3 years. When we submit phase 2, it'll be an additional 3 years. This is actually good for us because right now the entire Army is going through a grade plate review for enlisted. And with this MOS convergence, we're able to fix ourselves in that grade plate review. So there won't be this knee-jerk reaction of you can only have so many SAR majors, you can only have so many E8s. We're fixing that as we go along through this convergence. So the second part is, some of you may have heard about this. So we took the Commandant signed a memo on 15 August to take 494 25 Delta positions and move those to 25 Bravo in the function of ComSec. Okay, so in as an example, in a BCT, there are 3 25 Deltas on the MTO. 2 of those are coded for ComSec. So what we did was we just said, okay, Deltas don't need to be doing ComSec; they need to be doing cyber network defense. So we've transitioned those 2 ComSec custodian positions back to 25 Bravo. So we're kind of going back to where we started this whole thing, and that's across all compos. Okay, so that's 1, 2, and 3, all compos. That's submitted, but it will not take effect until FY20 when the MTOs are published. So you'll still have there'll still be 3 Deltas in a BCT as an example until this takes effect. And with that, I don't have anything else. We'll just go ahead and take questions.
Yes, turn over questions. All right, what you got?
Yes, Jacob Cox. I had a question about with the changes that you're making to the training and to the organization. What are the biggest forecasted challenges you're seeing coming from?
The biggest challenge we're seeing right now is speed. We're trying to do this very quickly. We got a lot of momentum right now in the Pentagon with the electronic warfare side of the house because of some things going on in Ukraine and other places in the world. So we have that going on for us, and the operational mindset understands the need for EW. Then on the USAREC, the U.S. Army recruiting side of the Army, we're seeing where last year's quota was to bring in 80,000 individuals for FY18, and the last projection I've seen for that, we're going to be anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 short. So we're fighting with hey, the Army's saying, hey, we want to build, and and lawmakers are pushing back, hey, you can't even build what you wanted to build before you started growing. So the challenge is to get those EW positions locked in, the growth, while we still have that momentum. So that's why we're pushing so hard to expedite that training. For us to to drop the packet, the staffing action to convert an MOS from E5 to E9 down to E3 to E9 and quadruple that length of training and have that training ready to teach in less than a year is nothing short of amazing from the training side of the house to be able to do that. So I think our biggest challenge is the speed at which we're doing it. So, Scott, you got it.
And so just to kind of add on to what Sean said, so like Sean said, we're planning on doing the first AIT pilot next September. So a little bit over 12 months from now, we're planning on having this brand new course. We know, 12 months from now does not meet the TRADOC approval process. In TRADOC's mind, we shouldn't be doing this until about 2022. So we'll be doing it a lot faster than the resourcing behind it. So I'm sure resources will be a challenge. We'll have to find a bill payer for what we want to do. Sean mentioned that right now when we bring people in at the 2030 level, that's kind of their baseline EW knowledge. That's a 9-week course. Well, we'll be doing about a 35-week AIT. So we'll be expecting a lot greater things from our AIT soldiers than the EW NCOs that are out there right now. So we'll be looking, as we try to look for instructors to teach this material, we'll probably have a challenge with finding the instructors. We had the same challenge, I can tell you, when we stood up cyber. We had to send the NCOs through the course, so we had to find people who could instruct it. Back when we stood up cyber, I can tell you that we used students that were coming through. We quickly identified who the best students were, and a lot of times they became the instructors for the class. I'm not sure that the same thing is going to happen when we stand up EW. Another challenge we have is ranges. So EW, we're going to require range space that we really don't require with cyber because that becomes more digital. The typical range model, the IMCOM TRADOC range model is usually 5 years. If we're expected to be training this stuff in a little bit over a year, that 5-year model doesn't really work for ranges. So we know the ranges are going to be really, really expensive, and we're also not really sure what we're looking for with our ranges either because this is new. We're looking for greater expectations with cyber. We want to do bigger and better things with it. Beyond what we're doing currently, because currently right now, most of the EW stuff is focused on kind of the protect, crew, Duke, and stuff like that, and we're really trying to enhance the electronic attack and electronic support pieces as well. So we don't want to just focus back on electronic protect. So I can tell you all those challenges mean we're going to be having to go outside and find people who can come in and deliver the instruction that we're looking for, provide the equipment because I'm not sure if he's in here, but the cyber senior warrant officer is Chief Cardenas. He's an EW warrant officer, so he's actually working the kit right now. Because the kit that is currently out for the EW force is probably not the kit that we need to be training our folks on because that's not the stuff that's going to be out there 2 or 3 years from now. So, all of these things are challenges that we're having to work through right now.
Wish we just had one to give you. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Coop? We have absolutely had that discussion, and we toyed with branch detailing starting in FY17. And when we went to do it, we didn't think that they were going to let us assess in as many as we wanted because we wanted to get ahead of the EW growth coming and the EW merger and have enough lieutenants that were going to become captains to assess 17 Bravos in. But then when we went and said, hey, we need to assess 90 a year, they said, hey, no problem. So we were able to do that without branch detailing. So since then, we really haven't had that conversation. I think that's one that we'll definitely continue to have in the future. And like I was saying, I don't ever see a day where Army is not utilizing the VTIP, the Volunteer Transfer Incentive Program. Even whether we're bringing them in to be 17 alphas or sending them on to follow on training to become electronic warfare technicians, that population, the majority of them will come out of combat arms. And, cyberspace being a domain, us maneuvering in a domain, enabling tactical commanders to maneuver through that domain, we definitely want a percentage of our force to understand the maneuver vernacular. And that chart I had up there with the bi-echelon, one of the things where the increases at those the AFCEA core division levels was increasing our officer population out in force conformations. So even if we don't get to where we're branch detailing, we'll still have more cyber and EW officers out into force conformations than we do today. Does that answer your question? All right. Anything else? Sir.
In my experience, it takes years of education and specialized training to be an effective cyber operator. And I don't see you addressing that level of background that's usually necessary for that sort of specialty. Are you assuming they're coming in with that knowledge, or are you planning on training?
So really this brief was really kind of focused at CEMA at the tactical level. So I didn't cover what we do with our cyber folks. So cyber folks, 17 Charlie is the enlisted MOA. I didn't cover any of that in this brief. I really kind of focused. Yeah, I strictly was looking at what we're doing to support the CEMA at the ULO, which for us is going to be the EW folks. And I actually, I didn't show up the, what we're planning on doing with 35 weeks of AIT. I really kind of looked at, what we're doing right now to integrate to CEMA at the tactical levels.
But to that point, not to steal my training partner's thunder, but their MOS and AOC producing courses on the cyber side are some of the longest in the Army. So they're definitely prepping them and setting them up for success. And not only that, but they're actually training to the three-letter agency standards that they need to be trained to. So when they go out there, they can fall right into work roles instead of showing up and having to do additional training.
Yes, Jake Cox with Sword Technology. Another question with, you have your signal officers and they're doing the training. What I'm curious about is, we were talking earlier with about when you face the jamming on the battlefield, and you might need to coordinate with a CEMA cell to find out what's going on. How does that second lieutenant, captain at a signal battalion, how are they going to interact with a CEMA cell to find out what kind of effects might be levied against them?
You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think CEMA will be in a signal battalion. It will be in a division corps.
Or brigade headquarters.
Right. So it's really from an S6 perspective, I think, is what you're looking at. So they got to be tied in. When I will talk operational experience that I had, because I was the J6 in Iraq 2 years ago, and for General Townsend in the multi-domain ops. The J6 shop has to be tied into that CEMA cell, because what's happening, it's really the non-lethal and lethal effects that they're looking at, and if you don't have a J6 rep inside that, then it could be a bad day for you, because they could end up jamming something that you're using, and sometimes they're not talking. There's good. I would tell you, they mentioned the 25 Echo being in the CEMA cell, so that's a signal MOS, and a G6 and an S6 at a brigade level has one of those as well. That crosstalk amongst those guys, because in the 6th realm they work more frequency management than what the CEMA guys working. But that crosstalk there has to happen, otherwise you will have a bad day. And I will tell you, we did have a bad day in Iraq, so without going too far into it, but if you don't have somebody in that in those, really it's usually run by the artillerymen, because they're the fires guys, they're the effects guys. If you don't have somebody in that working group, then you're in for a bad day. And the MI folks as well, because the effect you may want may not be jamming, it may be collecting. and,
Yeah.
and you might be precluding that.
And then, and just, I don't know if you can see it, but doctrinally, I mean, the CEMA cell up here for a BCT includes a 6 rep at the theater. Again, the G6 has a rep in there. They're also, you have the EWO folks, the information operations. I'm just hitting and spectrum management. So in addition to the S6, you also have the spectrum management folks. So doctrinally, I'm not sure, how it actually gets applied by the force out there, but doctrinally, they should have both the S6 and the spectrum management folks in the CEMA cell. So.
All right, any further questions? All right, thank you for your time. Hey, it's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Appreciate it. You would never know you weren't de-designated.
I don't know about all that.
Question, did you work with Jason Dennis?
Who?
Jason Dennis?
Yes.